Hello, everyone. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Seriously Business Podcast. If you weren't paying attention to last week, this week we are doing a kind of story exchange. Last week, Jolie told some stories of her time in HR, which were very interesting. And this week, I have brought some horror stories from HR, at least shared on the internet, that we want Jolie to kind of go over,
I've never
break
heard them
down.
before,
Never
so
heard any of them. So before we start that, I kind of want to set like almost ground rules for this in a way.
okay.
Because I do think to some extent we could always hypothesize, oh, maybe the narrator isn't reliable. Like that's always a possibility
That's
for
right.
any of these stories because they're posting it, we only get one side, yada, 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 yada. So I think what's fair is we say going forward that these stories, we're going to take them as face value as we can, right? And assuming that the narrator is 100% accurate, even though they're probably not, assuming the narrator is 100% accurate, what the perspective on it from that point
Well,
going.
and I'd like to add too that it is very easy, and having moved around and followed usually pretty high-leveled leaders, whether it was as a director or a VP or now an SVP and CHRO, it is very easy. I want to be careful how if somebody who was part of the story ever hears the podcast, it is very easy to be a backseat driver, right? You don't have all the inputs, you can't see the dash, you don't have all the mirrors. And so when I do, follow somebody, and I hope when folks follow me, I typically try to always say when someone brings me a horror story, because that's inevitable. Now, these I've never heard, but I try to be a little bit gracious and say, I probably would have made the same decision if that's all the information I had. Because usually when you're hearing these after the fact, there's a lot more information that comes out. And so I probably will have a lot of questions because I haven't heard any of these, as I
Yeah.
keep saying. But people look at things from different perspectives. And if you're following somebody or if you're dealing with the HR person, just be cognizant of the fact that they may have more information than you have, or they may have less information than you have. So it's very easy to come to a conclusion and find fault because you didn't have as much of the story. So I just wanted to preface it by that.
All right. Well, we're going to start with one that I don't remember if I told you briefly as we just talk some days, but it's one that sticks in my mind as a very interesting one to
Okay.
start out. And yes, this will be explicit because this specific story is a little topically explicit. So, it is a small business company, name not foretold, of course. There's this male individual who is the narrator of this story and the person who feels he was wronged by HR. So he is this almost upper management level position, and they work with kind of the newer wave of people. So new hires they give like him for a few months, and then they move them to someone else and stuff like that. He's like an intro, almost orientation like probation
A
intro
developer,
manager.
trainer,
Yeah,
something like that. Okay.
but that's what he does. Now he had a individual female who joined the company as at this time was a probationary employee when the story takes place. And one day he had to have a meeting with this individual about their performance metrics, right? Because they were not really performing to what the company wanted them to. So they pulled them aside in this room that they do all their meetings in, and had a brief breakdown saying, hey, these are the things that you need to improve on, things like that, so forth. Move on. They both go away, do their own things. Well, the next day, this narrator employee comes in.
I know where this is
Yeah.
headed because I've experienced this before.
This employee comes in, and as he comes in, the person who apparently runs their front desk, he went to sign his code or wave his card or whatever, and it was declined. So he goes to the person running the front desk, and they're like, oh, yeah, so there's a situation going on. You should have gotten an email from HR. Right now, we're trying to solve it. Check your email. Make sure you got it. They check it. They did get an email. They read the email, and apparently HR had been reported a situation, is how they described it, without much information, that they're investigating. Because of that, they have told all the people involved to not come to work and that they're going to cut off access for a little bit while they do this investigation. Well, 2, 3 days pass, and the person says, "Hey, HR, do you guys have any updates? Anything new? Yada, yada, yada." Well, HR chimes back on him and says, "Well, what was brought to our attention is that you have been accused of sexual misconduct in the workplace by another employee." And they say the name of the employee in this. And it was the employee he did that small little kind of managerial conversation with. And HR said to him, again, this from his perspective, in the email said, "By our policies, any sort of sexual misconduct we take incredibly seriously, which is why we're investigating. However, we could not find any information one way or another. And because of our policies, we have to side with the person making the report." And eventually the story continues, and it turns out that in the room, well, the guy goes home. He's unofficially fired. He's looking for a new job and all this stuff. They don't make a big deal of it. They just fire him and say, "We're not going to put this on your record or anything. Don't worry about it," or whatever. So he's looking for a new job, and he's talking with one of his friends from that workplace after, an IT guy, right? Just on Facebook or something. The IT guy doesn't know what happened, of course. And this person, being upset, kind of vaguely talks about it, about this individual. And he's like, the IT guy goes, "Well, there's a camera in that room. I'm pretty sure there'd be footage." Well, the IT guy takes the initiative and looks for that footage, finds it. Nothing happened in the footage. So then a lawsuit happened, of course. But the story there is that the guy came to the conclusion that HR is very clearly siding with one person over another. "I worked here 10 years and this is a probationary employee. How is this even remotely fair?" So what's your perspective? I think I've told you that maybe a little bit, but what's your thoughts on that situation?
There. Now, again, I'm going to preface this by saying it's going to sound very judgmental.
Of course.
There are so many issues in the presentation of that story. So, of course, in my career, I have had an employee allege something against another employee. Happens pretty frequently, believe it or not. But there, from the very beginning of this guy showing up and his badge not working, that's a fail. HR should have called him on his cell phone. If he's a manager or a trainer, he should have a cell phone, or that morning been ready to meet him. In this story, never do you hear that they talked to him. That's the first thing that you do, is you take the statement of the person who's complaining, and it is not that uncommon to suspend the individuals who are being investigated. There's two reasons you do that. One, to protect the individual, believe it or not, because you don't want retaliation, you don't want bullying, and you want to make sure that they don't do anything that clouds or calls into question the whole interview process and investigation. People behave differently when they're under duress than when they're not, and stress can create really bad behaviors in people on both the accusers and the accused side. So that's not all that unusual, but never should you do these things through email. It should be a discussion. I say always HR owes the individual the respect and the courtesy to sit down from them. You'd usually start with the accuser. You'd ask a ton of questions. Long before you went to the accused, you would ask questions like, were there witnesses? Did anybody see them coming and going? Is the office a glass door? That's why a lot of offices have glass on the front of them now, meeting rooms, so that you people can be observed, because you do want to shut the door for privacy, but you also usually want witnesses to situations where you think something might go awry, to protect both employees. And then you always ask. I mean, I just had an allegation of somebody who was taking pictures of confidential information on their computer screen. And when it came to me, the first question I asked was, do we have cameras? Are there cameras in that location? First question you always ask, because there usually are cameras in most places because most companies have had these experiences before. So those all sound like catastrophic fails at the end of the day. Never should an employee have to call to ask for an update. Usually when there's an investigation and you've talked to the person, you would tell them, I anticipate this investigation will take 3 to 5 days or 1 to 2 days or 2 weeks or whatever it is. And I will be calling you, at the end of day 2 or every other day or every day or whatever it is, because you're talking about people's livelihoods. And it is a incredible burden of responsibility to be the person who investigates, makes the recommendation of what the action should be. And then for me now, I'm the person who listens to the recommendation and either supports or doesn't support it. That should be something that is taken with incredible consideration and thoughtfulness. Another piece here that's really strange is, if it does happen often, believe it or not, that you have he said, she said. There's no way to prove who said what. But you have an employee in this situation, 10 years of experience who's never had any complaints before, if that's true. Even if you didn't have the camera, which is just a insult, you have to trust to some extent. I have an employee who's never had issues before. You would separate. You'd say, look, I don't know what happened. I can't prove what happened, but you two can't work together anymore. So you'd have to find some other accommodations. And you'd watch both of them like a hawk for a period of time. If there is no other supervisor, you'd have to find some other way around it. Now, some HR people, and I might have in my career said as well, now you're punishing the accuser. I have no proof that the accuser's allegations are correct. I'll roll that dice if I need to. Because someone who has a history, whether harassment is usually girl accusing guy, but it can be both ways. If you have a long-term working history with somebody and you haven't had now, if there were other things in this person's past, he'd been accused of this before. We knew that he was a bad manager. We knew that he had been dating people in the workplace. It might influence a different way. But really, you try to look at the preponderance of the evidence and the overall fact pattern. In this case, the fact pattern is you have somebody who, I don't even know from his side of the story only, did HR even speak to him and understand that he had given performance feedback? Because if she did this once and there's no proof, she's going to do it again.
Yeah.
Because she's got reinforcement that, hey, I can cry wolf and they're going to do something about it. And so you have shared this one with me before, and I just think I rolled my eyes and said, that's ridiculous. There's everything in that story. And again, we're taking his story as the only side, but it just sounds like a really sloppy investigation and an HR organization that maybe didn't take time to ask the right questions.
Yeah, I think because here's the thing as well, is the reason I'm bringing you these stories is this is really all people see when it comes to HR. You never hear about the good things. You never hear about the positive stories because, the news cycle. But you always hear stories like this where people are like, very clearly HR is incompetent, possibly.
And I think narrators hold things out. They don't tell you all of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, if there was a tape and HR didn't know there was a tape, that's really bad.
All right. Well, I have another one, which is we're flipping it, right? This is a girl who accused sexual misconduct, we'll say, on a upper level manager. Essentially, this individual worked in a bakery for a while where they opened and closed. So they did the morning and the evening shift. And their manager had some very strange ways they acted. Groping here, a little bit of odd sexual comments there, things of that nature.
Groping, wow, okay.
Yeah. But consistently. Now, this person most of the time just moved on because it was a temporary role in their mind. They just didn't want to bother.
When you say consistently, to this one person or everybody?
To this person from the story, supposedly.
All right.
At least from their perspective, that's all we get to see. But they write about, for example, one of the scariest times was when I was closing by myself. He came into the back of the bakery and kept following me around the bakery table.
Okay.
trying to grab me and tell me how well I was doing in that workplace and things like that. That's one of the quotes straight from the story. Other situations are she was like, I've asked him consistently to stop, right? And things of that nature. Well, she took it to HR, a higher HR. It wouldn't have been in the bakery, but it's part of some chain. And they go and talk to HR, and HR listens. Nothing immediately comes of it. A couple of days later, not both her, she is actually invited into his office by him. So she goes, and nothing happens in this situation. But he says to her, "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean this. It's been a misunderstanding, yada, 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 yada." Right? Well, HR, a couple days later, comes back and messages her after her having this meeting in this office and says, "Oh, don't worry, we're hiring new people, so he'll have more to manage, so you won't have to deal with him consistently anymore."
Oh, wow.
And a direct quote, apparently from the email, and there was a screenshot to back this in the story. I don't have it in front of me, but there was a screenshot because I remember where I found this story. In the screenshot, it said, "Once another girl is hired, he'll leave you alone."
Oh, wow.
In the email from HR. And, well, eventually she quit, if that wasn't an obvious route that story was going. But what's your thought process? That one's a little weirder, but I want to see what you think of that situation.
Well, and, and I do want to start this by saying I haven't worked like in retail type of environments. I've heard horror stories from retail type of environments. Excuse me. So the first advice I was going to give to her, trying to be a little bit more positive than condemning, like I was in my last review, is it is really important for the employee to keep details of times and places. Because that becomes a pattern of behavior that HR can then really do something about. The second thing is, I think it is a miss in the event that you don't have proof, which I'm going to assume the HR group had her word and him saying, "No, I didn't really do that. Oh, that's all a complete misunderstanding." It's not inappropriate. In fact, I would say I would tell the accused in a situation like that, because it sounds like he's not denying that he was doing things. He's just saying that wasn't my intent. So I would have that senior manager apologize and clarify to the employee that wasn't my intent, because that's more often than just out and out denial. In my opinion, HR should have told her first, "Look, we've looked into this. We want to make sure that you know that's not okay. He's going to be speaking to you to make clear that it will not continue. And if it ever happens again, this is how you need to report it." Then as the HR person, I would be checking back in with this person. The email of once we hire another female employee, that will go away. That's just, oh my gosh, it's almost like let's just create a situation where he's harassing everybody. Or let's just bring in another person for him to harass and make your problem go away. I mean, that's terrible. But I think another kind of miss here, and this is one of the things that doesn't pull through from the story, is somebody in HR who's probably not sitting near this place. Let's say it's Bob's Bakery, and there's 1,500 Bob's Bakeries across the country. For a short period of time, I told the story of working for the airline. I worked for an airline, and I had 50 stations. And when something like that came up, and there was a gang rape issue, believe it or not, when something like that came up, I immediately jumped on a plane and went to that station, and I spent over a week there because it was a significant allegation, and it proved to be the most horrific thing I probably have ever seen. Because I had to watch tapes and I had to get the police involved. It was harsh, and I don't know that I'm the same person having had seen that, much less this 19-year-old girl. And so put yourself in the same situation as this girl. I mean, if everything's done through emails or telephone conversations, where's the human element in human resources? You've got to have some, we should not be sitting in offices from afar looking at or listening to a conversation and making a decision that impacts people's lives. You have to get there, and I constantly say, you have to get dirt underneath your nails. You have to get kind of dirty and gritty and understand exactly what's going on. And so to me, that's unfortunate because this girl had a terrible experience that she's going to carry with her. Granted, he apologized to her. Well, that's just wonderful. But I have to ask, what's that relationship like even after he apologized? Before or after they hire the girl? And nobody should ever think, well, it's just a temporary situation. I have to put up with it. However, I've been there. I told one of my stories. I've been there where I'm like, I just have to put up with it. But it doesn't make it okay. And I think that's one thing that if you've never had that experience, you're not as empathetic as you think you are. Because it makes you sick to have to go to work every day. And to some extent, if she told him this is not okay, because I always say that with anything, well, he did something and it offended me. Did you tell him not to do that? Did you tell him that's not okay? Or, she started talking about her menstrual cycle or whatever, and the guys are disgusted. Did you tell her you don't want to hear that? Did you tell her that's not appropriate in the workplace? So it does start with that. But this one just sounds incompetent. And the fact that HR people are putting this all in writing is just amazing to me.
There's so many of these stories where it's like like clearly in writing what they've said or
I
are
just
doing.
am shocked.
It's mind-blowing.
I tell my folks all the time, there are conversations that you have that you never put in writing. And yes, that's because we're agents of the company too, but all of that's discoverable and all of that can be put, out on the internet. So, and it can be twisted and contorted, and especially if it's in a chain, it can be taken out of context and nobody understands really what led to that 2-sentence or 1-sentence response. And so things like this you don't put in writing, and you don't put findings of investigations. I mean, all of that's strictly confidential. If you are going to give a summary, you're going to do that in person verbally. So it sounds like they maybe don't have very experienced HR folks.
So I'm gonna move on to a lighter-hearted story next, because I feel like this is a pretty funny one I came across. Mid-level manager works at a small company of about 60 people, and on their way home one day, they were, as they normally do, they got their water bottle, filled it up on the way out, left. Came in the next day, called into an HR representative's office or generalists or whoever, and they said, hey, just so you know, this is a warning, you can't take company property off of company premises. And he was like, well, I didn't take anything. And then the HR person hit him with, well, yeah, but you refilled your water bottle? And he was like, okay, it's water? And they're like, yeah, but that's the company's water. Well, he found this ridiculous, of course, as any rational human would. And he actually, in his thing, he says, I thought she was kidding, or at the very worst having a really shitty day and lashing out. She wasn't having a bad day. And he eventually was at the water cooler later that day, and his boss was there, and he was talking with his boss. And he told him when he was warned about taking the water off of premises. And his boss literally collapsed in laughter. It was so funny to him. Very quickly, his boss was like, I'll talk to him, I'll sort it out. Nothing bad happens, that's the end of the story. But I find that story so funny because I'm sure in the policy, right, company property isn't clearly defined, at least enough. Or at least it's defined vaguely to cover as much as it can, right? But the fact that this HR generalist who, they don't say the experience of him or anything in the story, thinks taking water is company property. I just want to hear your thoughts on how funny that is.
There's more to unpack there than it sounds like. And let me kind of give you some context. Years ago, back during the recession, 07, 08, 09, I was in Phoenix. And in Phoenix, I was at a site that we found out there was a lot that we looked into, but specifically around water. Let me give you this one. We found out that we were spending about $1 million a year on bottled water.
$1 million.
$1 million
How
a
big
year.
was this company?
Well, this particular site, the company's enormous. This particular site had about 450 people.
Okay. Okay.
And so the proposal from management to HR was, let's stop providing this bottled water and we'll save $1 million. That's probably 5 or 6 jobs that we wouldn't have to lay off because we were trying to avoid layoffs. And so in Phoenix in the summer, I said, well, people have to have water. I mean, you have to have some kind of a backup. And the answer was, we have water fountains around the facility, blah, 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 blah. And so I said, $1 million seems like an awful lot of money for bottled water. Let's look at the contract first. Maybe instead of just saying we're not going to provide it, we say we're going to negotiate the contract. We can save 50% or something like that. And so what we ended up finding out was we had a pretty good contract, but the storyline that unfolded was that we would have people at the end of the day or during the day come in with these enormous like jugs that held 2 gallons, or even take like milk jugs and fill them up at our water bottles. We call them bubblers because it's the great big huge water jug that's upside down and they were taking hundreds of ounces of water every day home with them because it was Evian, believe it or not. And so I'm like, well, that's not the intended purpose of the water. So I'm giving you an extreme to say, I don't know what that HR's experience is. And if he took water one time, I don't know that I would say that, but he doesn't preface it by saying how much water is he taking. Is he taking 2 gallons? Because if I told you, hey, there's a guy every day and before he leaves, he's filling up 2-gallon jugs.
Well, he does say a water bottle worth of water, like a plastic water bottle.
Well, I don't know what a water bottle is.
That's fair. It's not, it's vague.
I'm just saying, so if you hear all of that, you say, okay, that's not the intended use of the water bottle. So that's one extreme. The other extreme is what you described. Maybe it's a 9-ounce water bottle and he's filling it up and he's taking that on his ride home. That's probably, at the end of the day, who cares? I would say, yeah, that's ridiculous. But you don't know what the backstory is as to why that was the situation. And maybe there was a reason. But let me flip it a little bit too. So let's say, for example, and this comes up ridiculously often. It's almost embarrassing to admit. But sometimes you have like a big event happening. So I'm going to make this one up. This isn't one I've specifically had, but there have been times when, we have a board meeting or you have a big event and you've got a ton of food or snacks or something that comes in. And after the event, it's whatever's left is, first come, first serve. You put it out and all the employees can come get it. Before the event, it's intended for the event. And I've seen a lot of times where employees would say, oh, but there were huge bags of candy. And usually, if it's in the office, I can just take it. Well, before the event, absolutely not, because it's intended for a different event. I get it. You weren't invited. Boo-hoo. I don't get invited to a lot of stuff too, but I know it's not mine. I don't eat it. After the event, unless it's been expressly said, hey, this is open for all, you shouldn't just take it because you don't know, like, for example, we do trick-or-treats and we do Christmas parties and, we'll have different candies that we stick up in the top cupboard of the common area and it's marked, Christmas or whatever. But it's a fine line sometimes where someone says, oh, well, it wasn't marked, or, oh, I know we had that out at Thanksgiving and it's still up there, or whatever the story is. So I'm not saying that was okay, the way she managed that. I mean, first of all, she probably should have talked to the manager. I don't ever usually talk to an employee without first going to the manager and saying, it's been observed, there's a pattern of behavior that this guy has taken, 20 gallons of water a week out of the building versus, oh yeah, he filled up his water bottle at the end of the day. So I think some of that is a fail on HR not to go back to the manager and say, hey, we've had reported to us this pattern of behavior. But to some extent, I don't know the context, so now it sounds like I'm defending HR, but the amount and the intent is important.
Yeah.
I took I took, this happens a lot, believe it or not, during back to school, where supplies tend to get locked up, because I took a pad of stickies home to do some work is different than I took a box of stickies home to do some work. Oh, and because I had extra, I gave them to my kid for school. It's a subtle line. And maybe you have stickies all the time that you're taking home, and it's one pad of sticky and you've left them at home. It doesn't seem like a big deal. But if you're doing that for the intent of them giving them to somebody else for another purpose, that is theft. Now, theft of water, if it's one little water bottle one time, that seems bizarre and almost sad to me. But I don't know what led to all of that, and I don't know the amount. So
Interesting.
you probably didn't get the response out of me that you
Well,
wanted to get.
I think it's interesting because I don't know what response to
Seems like
expect out of you,
overkill.
Well,
But
I mean, that situation was handled by the higher level executive just saying, who cares? It's like a 12-ounce water bottle or whatever, but
I don't disagree, but I do think that HR's fail was not talking to the upstream. Because we've had things reported to us that the manager didn't know anything about, but then we don't sit down with the manager and discipline or warn the person. We say to the manager, hey, there was an investigation, we've investigated, this is our findings, and then we talk to them about what needs to happen out of those findings. Somebody one time filled up their water bottle. Kind of seems like that HR person doesn't have anything better to do, but I don't know what frame of reference he or she is coming
yeah.
from. So,
All right, this is another goofy story, kind of. So there's this high school kid working for his or hers. Gender wasn't clear in the story, but they were working over a summer at their town's park department to
okay.
help upkeep parks, the whatever national park they must have had, or town park or whatever. And their boss was kind of an a-hole based on their description, but I think every employee to some extent would say that. But
Probably.
sometimes. But one time, right at the end of one of their periods where they were working at this park, their boss called them into their office. And this person doesn't tell too much. But the boss called them in and said, while there, he accused me of stealing a $3 check and then said I had to be let go. Well, I responded and said, well, I didn't steal from the department. And even if I had, why would I steal a $3 check? And apparently the boss just fired them outright and left. Well, later down the line, apparently that boss was let go for bad management and all this other stuff, apparently. But I do find that very, very funny that this is a situation where whether they had an HR department, I'm unsure,
Probably
right?
not,
But
but
the fact that situations like this where it's like, you're accused of stealing something, you didn't steal it, and then you're fired, and you're like, okay, what do you do? I think that's an interesting one to throw at you because it's like, what do you do if there is no HR department, if there is no third party to go to? At least, maybe there was here, but in this situation, I don't know if there was one. And then it's like, well, now what?
well, and it's interesting. Are you talking about like a check that is written out for
A
money?
written check for
Okay.
money.
That's a very odd one, because I would ask, how could he cash a check if he stole it? But again, I've been coming from an HR perspective. So there's first of all, it doesn't even sound like the manager asked him about it. Because you never want to assume guilt when you go in, even when you have the video. And that's why you'll hear HR say things to you like, well, tell me about, or how is it that, or what is this video showing me? You ask questions. Sounds like you're trying to get them to self-incriminate, and to some extent you are, but you're trying to enter into it without a preconceived notion of what happened. I saw you hit that person. You're like, okay, well, let's watch this video together. What do you see in that video, right? Because you're going to say, I watched the video and you hit the person, because now you're accusing them,
Yeah.
even though maybe they did hit the person. So that's probably the first place I'd start. That the manager doesn't even seem like he asked the employee any details. Another piece that's kind of interesting, and I learned this lesson when I was over a summer Job Training and Placement Act group out of a state that, these were funded for underprivileged kids, is especially if he's working at this summer job. He's probably a student, or he's probably fairly young. I'm saying he, it could be a she. But that's an experience that you're now going to leave with that person. And think hard and long about what type of a long-term impact that's going to have with that person. The amount of the check seems small, but I have seen people steal pens and other things. And usually what happens is it starts small. So let's say, for example, I had somebody who was embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars. It didn't start out with a $20,000 check. It started out with little things, like they started stealing small things that nobody would miss. I'm making this up, but a stapler, pads of paper. They started selling stuff online. We had a guy that he started out by, he bought something and he bought the wrong thing. And when he returned it, it credited his Amazon account instead of his work account. He didn't get caught. And so then now he's buying more and more expensive so he can get the credit back to his Amazon account. And that unfortunately is one of those things where I said people can act out of character. Most of us would have been like, oh crap, that's not good. Now I'm going to go and report it. Not everybody thinks that way. And you see, unfortunately, usually when you get to the point of termination, you see this pattern of behavior where this isn't the first time the person did this. This is just the worst time, and you've caught it. And so I'm just laying that out there to say, you do nip things in the bud. A $3 check that can't be proven seems a little odd with no other pattern of behavior. But, the HR person in me, again, now being the backseat driver after things have happened, says, I would assume that the manager was probably up to some nefarious things and blaming others as they were starting to bubble up. Mm-hmm. But your question was, what do you do when you don't have an HR department?
Yeah, what do you do in that situation?
And something like that, you probably had a city department. You could have possibly escalated above and outside. Again, you've got to figure out, is it worth all that effort? And some people would say no matter what, a bad person needs to be addressed. And if this manager or supervisor was a bad person, it needed to be addressed. That's fine if that's the pattern that you want to take. But you've got to think about the value versus the effort that's going to be put into it. Now, clearly, if that's the truth and the guy didn't take it, that's not okay. And I'm not suggesting it is, but, life will be full of experiences that are less than ideal. It sounds like he just was in the wrong place at the wrong time and had a bad manager. Now, it might not be inappropriate after the fact. He knows that this manager got fired, then to take it upstream and talk to the city councilor, the county office, or whatever it is, and say, it's water under the bridge, it's done. I'm not looking for my job back, but let me share an experience that I had with that person, because there could be other people as well.
Mm-hmm. Who had that experience. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we're at, what is our time at? I'm not keeping the entire track here. Okay, we got time for one more story, okay. I feel like. Let's go with an interesting one that I read up here on the other day. So there's a situation where, once I can find it in my notes, where is it? I've completely lost my own notes. Oh, okay, I found it. Okay, so this is strangely another situation of quote-unquote stealing, right? Individual worked at a kind of, I guess, almost bodyguard hire place. You hire bodyguards from it to do things for a short amount of time, nothing super complex. On their jackets, they have the security cables. Why? I am not entirely sure. They assume the security cables were used to lock them in place because you take them off when you leave, and then you come back and grab them the next morning with like a key or something. Wasn't sure what that was about, but apparently that's something their work did to make sure nobody stole the jackets because they were hard to make or something like that.
Okay.
Well, somebody didn't get accused of stealing a jacket. Got accused of stealing the security or the security lock on the jacket.
Hmm.
Because he came in one day and he did a normal shift, or he got brought to do some sort of almost A to B location guarding for some sort of like caravan of cars. So they got their car, drove over. Well, at the end of the day, when they went back, they didn't have the security thing on their jacket anymore. And they're like, huh, well, that was weird. I don't know where that went. So they hung it up. They walked over to their boss's office, which is like right at the exit, and said, hey, I don't know what happened, but my security thing on the jacket disappeared while I was working today. I hung it up over there, yada, 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 left. Well, that boss went on a trip the next couple days, right? And wasn't in office, but had heard, right? Well, while this boss was on this trip for a while, somewhere overseas, I would assume, because it was an international trip, HR, or not HR, but whoever maintenances the jackets, found that one of the security things was missing, took that to HR, because that's who the only group that was available that could look into it. And they looked into it and found security footage of the person, of the narrator in this case, bringing back the jacket without the security tag. Well, they were called into HR later, showed them the footage, and they said, so why'd you steal the tag? And he was like, well, I didn't. I talked to my boss before I left and told him this information. And they're like, oh, well, we're not going to be able to contact your boss for a couple days, so make sure to bring back the tag. And then he said, well, I don't have the tag. And they're like, well, find it. And then he was like,
Well, that's bizarre.
what do I do? What do you do
Yeah,
in this situation? Because apparently, for some reason, it wasn't explained in the story, but none of them could contact his boss for some reason for like a
Okay.
week. So, because none of maybe he was on vacation, I don't know, but they couldn't contact him for a week right when this was happening. So you had this really tense HR versus worker situation going on for no discernible reason. And it's
Yeah.
like, well,
I mean, even if I'm thinking like, for example, the tag somehow had $100,000 value. I, that one is difficult for me to understand, probably because I don't know the process, but people lose stuff. I just recently got called in where IT came to me all pissed off because this person has lost their phone 2 times and they want this person to reimburse the company because, now they're negligent. And I said, well, hold on a minute. I said, I can't force them to pay for the phone. It's a company issued phone. Tell them they can't have another phone because they're not responsible enough and they won't have a phone. I mean, I don't know what else to tell you. You don't have a policy that says you can charge them for the phone. Some people lose things. Now that's not okay, and you say you need to be more responsible, and now this is going to impact your job because you're not going to be able to take calls offline, blah blah blah, and that's part of your job. So I look at that and say I can't get my head around where HR is thinking on that, because if somebody says I don't know where it is and I lost it, telling them, well, you have to provide it, that gets nowhere with
yeah,
anything. I mean, it's
that's what I
gone.
thought too.
And the only advice I might have for the employee is, if something like that happens to you, maybe you want to send an email as proof that you told the manager that. I say that a lot. Like, I give direction to my people and I'll say, I'll follow up with an email on this, even though we've made the decision together, because I want you to have that email, because that email explains that you were given the direction or you escalated it and I had a decision point that I made. But I don't have any idea why HR would tell somebody, well, go find it. I mean, if it's gone, it's gone. It kind of is what it is. I don't know. This is an example I can think of. I once had my work phone and I worked for an aerospace company, and I had a lot of very confidential stuff that could have been accessed through that cell phone. I went into the bathroom and I sat the phone. There was a place to put like your purse inside the stall, and I sat my phone up there, and it wasn't one that dropped over the door. It was off to the side, and I washed my hands. I finished. I washed my hands. I left. I couldn't have been 20 feet from outside the entrance to the bathroom. And I'm like, oh, I forgot my phone. I go back and my phone is gone. Holy crap, my phone is gone. And the phone stayed on my body like 24/7. And so I couldn't find the phone. Well, then I called the phone and somebody said, yeah, I have your phone. If you want your phone back, give me X number of dollars. You meet me here and, and it was hundreds of dollars. So I called my security group, which not every company has a security group. And they were like, don't worry, we'll just shut it down. If it's online, call them. And while it's online, we'll shut it down. And they actually had police because it was extortion. And actually, we did federal government contracts, black ops stuff. And so, they pinged the phone, shut everything down on the phone that was confidential, and then that person ended up being arrested for having possession of that phone. I don't know what happened to the person. I got a new phone. They ditched and did intel on that phone. But I look at a situation like that and say, well, what if they had told me, well, go get the phone? How am I supposed to get the phone? The phone's gone. You want me to pay somebody money, extortion, to get my phone, put myself in an unsafe situation? Now, that's extreme compared to this, but if the tags are gone, the tags are gone. I don't know why HR would put that kind of pressure on them. I don't really know what they expect to happen. If somebody said, I lost something, you should never immediately say you stole it. People lose stuff all the time. We're human. I mean, who listening to this podcast hasn't lost something and been like, son of a gun, how could I have lost that? But it happens.
Yep.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting story because it's very brief. It doesn't say very much, but it's like...
Well, you don't know what is the impact of having lost that? Is it like, I mean...
It's unclear. Like, because I didn't even... the story wasn't super in-depth, but it doesn't even talk about what the tags are really for.
I don't know. I think one time, now this is funny, losing something and almost getting in trouble. I was actually the CHR of this small private company, and I had keys to the building. Now, it's not like we did black ops or anything. We made industrial equipment, but I lost the keys, and I couldn't figure out how I lost the keys. The keys were gone. They kind of were not happy with me. The CEO, those keys are, it was like they were... the worst thing that ever happened to the company, that I lost these 2 keys. And I said, I can't find them. I have been everywhere. They have to be somewhere in my house because I had them. And, I kind of got, I don't want to say reprimanded, but I got coached pretty heavily, and life moves on. Flash forward a year later, maybe 18 months later, I've left that job. I'm at a new company. We're moving, physically moving. We've sold this house. We're moving to another house. And as I'm cleaning out my son's room, I find these keys in his register. So apparently he had taken the keys and been playing with them, and they fell in the register on the floor. And so I could see them. They didn't fall through because the ring was too big. And so I pulled them out, and I had these keys. And I actually called the company and said, well, I'm moving, because they knew I was moving for my job. I said, I found the keys in my son's room. Apparently he had them, and, I'm going to put these in an envelope and ship these back to us. And I didn't even get a thank you. So
wow.
I'm sure I don't even think they changed the locks or anything, because I'm like, it's not like and they weren't identified as this is the address of this company. They had I think one had like a 3-digit number on each of them. Unless you knew where they went, they were useless to you. They were just random keys. But the president of the company, or CEO of the company, acted as if there were people standing outside our gates waiting for us to leave so that they could break into this building. And I don't even know what they would have stolen. I mean, we made industrial equipment, sheet metal and boxes.
I don't know, man. People can do a lot of stuff with sheet metal. And
I felt terrible. I was in my early 30s. I remember thinking, he made me feel so stupid and irresponsible. And maybe I was, but sometimes things get lost. And when I called him and said I'd send them back, people were like, yeah, well, whatever. And I did send them back, but I was like, cheesy cow, I was there for 5 years. You made it sound like a criminal. I mean, like a capital offense that I had lost these keys. And then when I send them to you, it's like... You'll be put
before the Supreme Court.
I know. And then when I send them back, I don't even get a thank you. I wasn't necessarily looking for a thank you, but, a ha-ha. I kind of thought it was funny. I thought they'd be like, oh, that's hysterical. Thanks, I appreciate that. That's what I would have done, but I got this. Yeah, well, whatever. I'm like, screw you guys. And I was a pretty big leader at that company, but that was my last experience. I'm kind of like, yeah, that didn't go the way I would have liked it to have gone. So anyway.
Well, in that case, we're kind of reaching the end of our allotted time here. Shorter than one of our other episodes, but still a fairly lengthy episode where we went through a couple stories. Maybe we'll do another one of that sometime in the future. We'll think about it. Because I do think there's just a lot of...
Especially if people like stories. This, if they like the stories.
Well, because you're bringing a new perspective, that they're not getting from Billy Bob Joe the 15th on Reddit, who just tells the story.
We could get negative comments to my answer on the water, but
I think
answer in life is
logically
it depends.
speaking, though, this is something me and you both do. You have to understand the context of the question, right? It's like, okay, well, if stealing a, I don't know, a couple pencils from someone, right? Okay, who's the someone? Is it a adult who can reasonably buy pencils, who doesn't need
Or did
pencils?
they just stick them in their
Or
bag? I didn't even realize they were taking them.
or is that a child who that's the only pencils they have?
Yeah.
You know, like that context is important. Every situation has context like that.
Well,
You know,
and my context about people stealing pens, this was because our company, through austerity measures, which is when they say you can't do any discretionary spend, trying to avoid layoffs. It was during the recession or just after the recession. We didn't buy pens. And people would come and say, I don't even know what I'm supposed to do. I don't even have a pen to take notes with. And, HR isn't going to tell you, we'll buy pens from home and bring them in. And I never stole pens, but I will say this. I traveled a lot internationally, and we would go to some of our company locations outside of the U.S. Like I went to Shanghai a lot. I went to Pune a lot. I was in Bangalore a lot. And they had these learning centers, and they had like massive numbers of these really nice pens. And I would ask, hey, I would like to have, could I get 20 or 30 of those pens and take them back and distribute them to the group? Because, their little logo was on them. And they'd always give me, and sometimes they'd give me like a box of 100 pens or a box of 50 pens, and I'm using air quotes, you can't see, smuggle these pens back in, and I would give them to the admins, and it was like I had given them $100 bonus. They'd be like, woohoo, we've got these pens. But because we were on such austerity measures, people would steal pens. I'd say, that person, I know they were in my office and they stole my pens. And I'd be like, we'll get you more pens. But pens became like cigarettes in prison. They were like a commodity. And so when you put it in context, you'd be like, well, can you prove they took your pen? Well, they have my pen. And then you have people who bring their own personal pens in worth hundreds of dollars.
never bring $100.
And then they're
pen,
like, my
man.
pen's missing. It's like, seriously, you're going to make me investigate your pen. Don't bring stuff like that in here.
Don't bring $100 pens.
Yeah. And back in the iPod days, well, I know I left my I know I left my iPod on my desk. Okay, I get it. Maybe you did that on accident. I literally had an iPad. It was a Pro that I left in offices where I was in that office a couple of days a week. I had to fly up to Chicago and be in the office. I left it in the office, realized I'd left it in the office when I'd left at like 6, getting ready to go to the airport at like 5 o'clock in the morning, went back into the office and it was gone. And so I knew the cleaning crew had to take it. It had to be somebody on the cleaning crew. And so I put in a missing item ticket, and then I was told, oh, we don't have cameras. Well, it was gone. And I probably had it 2 months. Well, it's gone. I can't do anything with it. My husband was trying to ping it. It never came back online the way we wanted it to come back online. But I know exactly where I left it, and it couldn't have been there 6 hours. It was gone. So I know none of my coworkers stole it. I know somebody on the cleaning crew stole it, but I can't prove it. It's my word that I left it on the desk versus somebody else's. And so as a mature adult, I have to say, that's on me. I left it there. I might as well have left it on the counter at a Chipotle. Mm-hmm. It's gone. Right?
Well, I think that's a good way to wrap up this episode.
On a depressing note.
On a sad note. But we'll see you all again next week. Topic currently undecided, but we'll come up with something by the time we record. Thank you all for listening. And that's it for this week of Seriously, the Business Podcast.
All right,
Thank you all for listening. Bye-bye.